My name is Leif Schaumann. I spent the war years in Haderslev, Denmark, just 35 miles north of the German border. Haderslev was the main town in North Schleswig, a disputed border region that had been returned to Denmark in 1920, following 56 years of harsh German occupation. So when German troops invaded Denmark on April 9, 1940, tensions and confrontations began to escalate between Haderslev's 11,000 Danish and 2,000 German citizens, spurred by armed German soldiers roaming on foot, by motorcycle with sidecar, and in patrol cars throughout the town. As a 4-year-old at the time, I quickly became aware that Danes were good and noble, and Germans bad and evil. I myself learned to fear, to hate, to fight, and to hide early in my life, traits that took me decades to rid myself of. Intolerance and prejudice, cruelty and vindictiveness festered and grew in step with recurring incidents of repression, sabotage, and reprisal. In my immediate family, one complicating factor was that my father was part of an old, locally prominent and stoutly Danish family, whereas my mother came from a patrician family in the German state of Saxony. Although she had become a Danish citizen shortly after her marriage, my mother's Danish vocabulary was limited, and she spoke with a distinctly German accent. Consequently, she was subjected to many indignities and humiliating experiences. I was often embarrassed and felt angry in these situations. Most of the time my anger was directed at my mother's tormentors and detractors, but sometimes I was also annoyed with her imperfect Danish. As the war dragged on, communication with my mother's family waned because of censorship and irregular and unreliable mail service, and in late 1944, all contacts ceased. My comrades and I thought of ourselves as being a part of the Danish underground, as we engaged in cowardly and wanton acts of taunt and physical abuse against the despised German soldiers, and especially against members of Haderslev's German minority. We defaced German homes with paint, ink, and rotten fruit, often in the form of the hated swastika emblem. We vandalized their gardens, especially just before flowers were to bloom or fruit and vegetables were ripe. For several months after the glorious Liberation Day on May 4, 1945, I heard and saw a continuous stream of German troops and equipment flowing down Highway 10. Among the vanquished enemy, the lucky ones came in cars, on motorcycles, in trucks, tanks, and armored personnel cars. But hundreds, perhaps thousands, came on foot, by bicycle, in horse and even goat-pulled wagons and carts, and on horseback. Some came in small groups, some in pairs, but many walked alone, all carrying, pushing, pulling, or dragging their personal belongings along as best they could. Often appearing disheveled, unkempt, dirty, and smelly, these remnants of the once proud, mighty, and invincible German army presented a pitiful sight. However, my friends and I had no sympathy for their plight. We pelted them, yielded insults, and impeded their retreat with nails, broken glass, tripwires, and arrows. Many months later, we learned that most members of my mother's family had survived the war, but none with their health, property, or personal belongings intact. What was not destroyed during the war was soon lost as communism succeeded Nazism in East Germany. Then, in 1946, my father obtained a special travel permit and began his exhausting semi-annual train, bus, and taxi journeys to Werdau in Saxony, with huge suitcases containing food for my mother's family. During this time, I learned much about regrets, forgiveness, reconciliation, tolerance, and compassion. The war had kept a lid on such thoughts and feelings.